Hi everybody, my name's Helena and my daughter Anisha. We're going to open up this ceremony with a old Unangax song. It's called Tu Yosakanan, which means don't be lonesome. And I feel that this is appropriate. A lot of the lyrics say, I will see each other again, and our ancestors and our family members through this, I believe we will see each other again. All right, we're gonna start now. Start, Anisha. Tuyo sakanan, kita sakanan, ukalimen sakakan, asakaka, lidalikula, askalina, anwaya. Asakalakan, kidalakan, tingatin, ukrutin, tuyo sakanan, kita sakanan, ukulimen sakakan, askaka, lidalikula, askalina, anwaya. Askalakan, kidalakan, tingatin, ukrutin. I just wanted to offer to Akuka to help everybody through this panel and help our words be guided by love.
Well, thank you, Helena, for the beautiful song. And I know during these tough, trying times with the global pandemic, people can get lonely. So we really appreciate your beautiful music. So good morning, everybody. Kila, my name is Michael Livingston. I'm a cultural heritage specialist with the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association. I'd like to thank Kimiko and Julie for this opportunity to speak with this amazing audience. The title of our presentation this morning is Aleut Repatriation, Oral Histories and World War II Reclamation Efforts. And we have three wonderful people on our panel this morning. And we're going to start with Okalina Patricia Lekanoff-Gregory. I've known Patty for many, many years. I actually went to high school with her husband, David, in Bristol Bay, Naknek King Salmon. And then Patty, David, and I were students up in Fairbanks together. Patty is from Unalaska and is going to share some information about what her family went through during World War II. And if we have time, she's going to fast forward and speak about her work as administrator with APERT, Aleutian Pribilof Islands Restitution Trust. So Patty, if you would unmute, and I'll turn the microphone over to you. And Kagasakun, thank you.
Kagasakun, thank you so much, Dr. Mikey. Good to see Lauren, Martin, and Helena, and of course, Kimiko. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this presentation. I am Aleut, born and raised out in Unalaska, and both of my parents were evacuated during World War II, so their stories are really not written down. They were passed on by Ray Hudson and some of the Park Service people. Although my mom was not in the village of Kashiga during the bombing, she was would have been evacuated like the rest of her family from the village of Kashiga. Kashiga is about 40 miles southwest on Unalaska Island. So my mom was actually over in the BIA hospital, and that was bombed during World War II. And my mom was there at the hospital with her mom, Dora Kudrin, and she was had her eyes patched. So of course, if you can imagine, a youngster about 10 years old, could not see anything. She could hear it, but she was trying to remove her patches, and the nurse put her cape over her and, told her, no, you can't, open your patches. Of course, my mom was terrified and trying to see. And by then my grandmother had gotten there too, and they evacuated them to bunkers, fortunately. And of course, being blindfolded, my mom did not know where, and my grandma was not familiar with Unalaska, so she wasn't sure. She just said it was a dirty and wet place that they put her in. So that's my mom, and then somehow or another, she well, she was, of course, young in Unalaska, being evacuated and waiting for the rest of her dad and her sister to come out of Kashiga. So, of course, mass confusion. And my dad's side of the story, he's from Mucushin, which is also on Unalaska Island below the village, below the volcano, is Mucushin Village. And my dad's family had just moved over about 2 years earlier from Mucushin to Unalaska. So they were there during the bombing. And my dad's dad had bought a house, and my dad recalls, and, you know, he just 17, it was June 3rd, and he, sees all the ruckus and trying to scramble to get all of his family, to safety. Excuse me, let me back it up. My dad's mom and dad had both passed 40 and 41. So my dad became the instant dad, as he was the oldest of 10 siblings. So he had to watch his youngsters' siblings. And so he, of course, witnessed the bombing and, all the chaos that was happening. And back to the BIA hospital. And Kamiko, if you could show that one slide that had the building or the town. Thank you. You could see on the lower right-hand side, that is the BIA hospital in Unalaska. The village would be to the right of all of this, but in the middle of there is a Northern Commercial Company or a cannery. So if you can imagine, that 3-story building was bombed during World War II. My dad's little brother, Lazar, was actually a patient in there with TB, and they'd forgotten to take him out because he was on a breather or oxygen off and on. So this was on June 4th, and June 4th was actually my dad's birthday. He turned 18, and he tried to join the military, but they would not allow him to. And so this was an unfortunate situation. And Kamiko, if you could show the picture of the my parents there. Thank you. There's my mom, Polly, or Pauline Dora Kudrin, and married my dad in 1949. My dad, Nikolai Simeon Lekanoff, and he later became the starosta of the church. So you see the church on the right with the sunset. And my dad was a caretaker of that church for over 65 years. And actually, so imagine I have 10 siblings like my dad's family. And so my dad actually took care of the church. And if you can imagine, income was very, wasn't very abundant back in the day. My dad used to comment that he'd work for $70 a month. So just pennies. And then, so my parents met after the war, and by then my mom was going to high school in Unalaska, and my dad actually had to quit school at a young age so he could help his parents when they moved to Unalaska. So, a job wasn't, or excuse me, education wasn't, anything important to him. And but later, as growing up and he became a parent, education became very much a priority for us. On the bottom left, it's just a perspective of Alaska, showing Unalaska Island off on the inset there. And you can see we're right out there in the middle of the Bering Sea, basically below where the Pribilofs would be. And just on my parents' side, they again met early on, probably after the war. My dad was evacuated to Burnett Inlet, and my mom was also to Burnett Inlet just because she was in Unalaska when they evacuated. But sadly, her family, her dad and sister, were taken over to down to by Ward Cove, and eventually they all got brought over to Burnett Inlet off of Wrangell. So fortunately they were able to stay together. And down there in Southeast, my dad worked at the Ketchikan mill and odds and in different jobs. He did not travel to the Pribilofs like most men were sent off to the Pribilofs to go do the sealing for the government. But my dad was able to work a job in different parts in Southeast Alaska. So when they come back, they're, of course, 3 years older than what they were. And my dad's, family was actually, he has three sisters, and they did not return back. 4 sisters. They did not return back to Unalaska. Well, the youngest one went with her godparents to the Pribilofs, and the other 3 sisters actually were pretty much, going to boarding school and never did come back to Unalaska. And sadly, one of his brothers died and was buried in Burnett Inlet, and Stephen Lekanoff, he has an unmarked grave somewhere down there. So, sometime we'd like to do a memorial. And then his brother Tim was buried in Unalaska, or is buried in Unalaska, and his youngest brother Lazar also was buried during the war, or before they were evacuated on July 19th. So he was buried because he died, not because of the bombing, but because, he suffered from TB. And my mom's family, she has 3 sisters, my mom being the oldest, and of course, like I said, graduated from high school in Unalaska, and 2 of her other sisters did not come back. They stayed in boarding schools in stateside. And then my mom's youngest sister, who was actually conceived down in Burnett Inlet and then born in Unalaska in September of 45 when they returned, grew up in Unalaska most of the time, and then went to different boarding schools or see her other sisters off and on. So she lived in and out of Unalaska most of her life, and is now pretty much retired here. And so my mom and dad, of course, met, and we have 10 siblings. All of us live in Unalaska, except for one who lives down in Olympia. And they have over 20 grandkids, and I'm going to say almost 10, I should have wrote the numbers down, great grandkids. So my mom and dad both loved their villages. They both wanted to go back. My dad was able to go back to Mucushin with the national park journey that we did. And there was nothing really standing except for the old barn. We were able to put up Russian Orthodox crosses in Mucushin, Kashiga, and Borka with the National Park Service in remembrance of those villages. Sadly, like I said, those villages were never reoccupied, but they still called those places home. And to me, like I said, I was very proud to be a descendant of both Mucushin and Kashiga, hearing their stories, and then living in Unalaska and hearing the stories of the people from Borka as well. And that pretty much is my story, Dr. Mikey.
Thanks, Patty. We've got a couple more minutes. If you wanted to just share a little bit about what you're doing today in terms of being the administrator of APERT and what APERT is for our audience.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. APERT is the acronym for Aleutian Pribilof Island Restitution Trust, and I am the administrator for that. This was what the federal government, they were sued by the Aleuts and the Japanese to get restitution, for money and everything lost. Of course, money can't replace things, but for the Aleuts, we were able to get $15 million that went for the loss of Attu and the damage that happened during World War II. Still, sadly, we're still suffering, and the Pribilofs suffering from the pollution during World War II. And we were able to get monies. A lot of this monies was put for the restoration of the churches in the villages on Alaska that was bombed. Of course, the 3 abandoned villages that never got relocated. So those 3 churches never have anything put up for that. And that's one goal. I would like to at least have a little monument or something erected for those 3 villages. Akaten, Nikolsky, those chapels have been restored. And this was done, started in 95 and finished pretty much in about 1998 when they finished restoring them. Both of the chapels in St. Paul and St. George, and also one in Atka. And the one in Atka, they had a little side chapel built in memory of the chapel of Attu. So what I do, the remaining money, we have about 5 million more that's in a trust, and I administer that money for the Aleut survivors. Originally there were 881 that were evacuated, and by the time this law was passed in 1989, they had, I don't have the exact numbers, but over 600 people, Aleuts that were left. And so my job was to make an annual disbursement to each one of the people that were evacuated. And again, like I said, money really doesn't replace anything for memories and all the stuff that was lost during that time. But this was one thing that, they fought for during, to get something, because of everything that was lost. So I managed that money. Sadly, we're of the 881, we're about barely 100 of the Aleuts remaining. A lot of them do not know, or the stories. They say, I'm tired of telling the story. The story, or you could see the story on videos and stuff. But so that's what the trust also did with some of the money. They made videos, documentaries. One of the booklets that they worked with the Lost is called the Lost Villages, with Ray Hudson's help and the high school students who are recording the stories and trying to get some of this put down. And like I said, videos as well. So, what they will do with the remaining money, when the last of our people, the evacuees, pass, we're not sure yet. So I just started this job. I've only been at it. I'm going on 4 years this year, and I work for a board of trustees of 7. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Some amazing history there, and thanks especially for what you're doing as administrator of APERT. I'd like to move to Mr. Martin Stepetin next. I think I met Martin about the year 2001. I traveled to his beautiful island of St. Paul and was teaching a kayak building class, and Martin was then, I think, a high school student. Since then, Martin has moved to Juneau, and I'd like Martin to tell a little bit about what it might have been for his ancestors in the 1940s when the United States military showed up. And then if Martin has time to speak about some of the amazing work he's doing now with Funter Bay. So Martin, if you would unmute, I'll turn the microphone over to you.
Kella, Mike, Patricia, Lauren, thank you all for having me this morning. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on this forum. I really appreciate it. As Mike said, I have, since moving here to Juneau in 2011, I have begun picking up work in regards to everything that happened in Funter Bay. I moved down here in 2011. I was following my brother down to Juneau. My brother has a family here, my oldest brother, Carl. And so my name is Martin Stepetin. I'm from St. Paul Island, Alaska. I was born in Anchorage in 1986. I'm 35 years old, and I graduated from St. Paul Island High School. My mom and dad names are Carl Stepetin, who was actually born here in Juneau, Alaska, which is really strange for a young Aleut boy to be born so far away from St. Paul, but it happened during the war, and he was born here in Juneau. And my kids are also born here too, so that's kind of special for me. My mother is Pauline Krukoff Stepetin, and my mother wasn't born until after the wars happened. Thank God. It was a terrible time. So in 1942, whenever the war started and the bombing began in the Aleutians, as Patricia mentioned, the military wanted to figure out what to do with the Aleuts in the Pribilofs. And in the Pribilofs, they were harvesting fur seals, and this is a very lucrative business for the United States Treasury. Not that the Aleuts were making any real money off this, or basically slaves to this, including my grandparents, but this was home to them. And in 1942, a boat called the Delaroff came to St. Paul on a warm summer day as the community was playing a game of softball on the ball field, baseball, and they gathered everybody up and told them you have 1 hour to go grab one bag, and we're all going to get on this boat and we're going to leave. There's a war happening. And everything that happened after this, the entire town, my hometown of St. Paul, was loaded on this boat, the Delaroff. Everybody was told to take only one bag. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And the way this happened and the lack of care and the lack of preparation that took place because of that was it resulted in a very tragic event that took place over the next 5 years, where a lot of people from my hometown and Patricia's hometown and all throughout the Aleutians, people just died because of a lack of preparation, a lack of medicine, a lack of food, starvation. It was really terrible. So the people from St. Paul and St. George were on the Delaroff, and also the people from Attu. They took off and they went. They didn't know where they were going whenever they initially left the islands. The men in the Navy didn't know where to bring them. They were trying to figure out where to bring them. Eventually, they were in the Gulf of Alaska, still trying to figure out where to bring them, and they found a place in Southeast Alaska called Funter Bay, and also basically what they found was these abandoned fish canneries here in Southeast Alaska. The cannery in Funter Bay had been closed for over 20 years, I believe, by the time the Aleuts were brought here to this cannery. So no running water, no nothing, no heat, no insulation. Winter's coming, and so everybody was brought there. Everybody from St. Paul and St. George and Attu were brought to Funter Bay. There wasn't enough room for them in Funter Bay, so they took the people from Attu and they brought them down to an island called Killisnoo Island, and they left the people in Attu there, and that was another abandoned cannery that had no running water and had no heat or insulation, and so I just want to talk about the camp in Funter Bay. The camp in Funter Bay, and this is the work that I've been involved in since I've been here. In 2011, and in 2014, I went on a trip with my wife that was sponsored by the Friends of Admiralty Island, and we went to Killisnoo Island. This was sponsored by Friends of Admiralty Island. I didn't know who they were at this point. I just knew that it was to put a memorial plaque up at the cemetery in Killisnoo. And that's exactly what we did. Well, on our way there were people speaking on the mic, and everybody told me, look, there's Funter Bay right there. And I said, oh my God, that's Funter Bay. That's what I've learned about my whole life. It's just right there, you know? And people were talking, but nobody knew the ramifications of this location. So I got on the mic and I started talking about everything that took place there to everybody. And the board members on Friends of Admiralty took notice of who I was and the history that I had, and they invited me on to join their board. And I have been a board member of Friends of Admiralty ever since, which is great. They do great work. So we made it to Killisnoo. We put the plaque up. The Killisnoo Cemetery is on private land. Because it's on private land, this cemetery, like a few others, has not been taken care of. As a Russian Orthodox person, it's very disrespectful, and it's not okay to not take care of your cemeteries. And if we had control of that cemetery, we would be able to take care of it, and it would have been taken care of, just like Funter Bay's cemetery is. After we figured out that on that trip that the cemetery is on private land and there's nothing we could really do about it immediately, we, working with Friends of Admiralty Island, and mainly a guy on Friends of Admiralty Island, his name is Rick Ionalino, we worked together and we tried to figure out who owns the land where the Funter Bay Cemetery is. And believe it or not, that was kind of hard to figure out. There's a lot of different pieces of land in Funter Bay. There's state land, there's Forest Service land, there's a bunch of private land in Funter Bay. And so it took us about 2 years of research. And also, we approached the state about this, and they didn't know if they owned the land on Funter Bay, and they had to research it too. Finally, we figured out that the state of Alaska owns the Funter Bay land where the cemetery is in St. Paul. And we approached them in about 2016. The Friends of Admiralty Island actually sat down with the Department of Natural Resources, who manages the land, and we asked them if there's anything we could do to protect that cemetery. Thank you, babe. Because we know that the Department of Natural Resources they manage a lot of things, mining, forestry. It's their land. They could do whatever they want with it. Well, that's not okay with us. And we're worried about the cemetery where our loved ones lay. And so we asked them if there's anything we could do to protect it. Initially, they told us, yes, there is something we can do. We can put a ILMA on that tract of land. An ILMA is an interagency land management protection plan, which would be great, except that the head of DNR can remove that immediately if he wants to, or the next guy that is the head of, and that position changes with every governor administration. So we thought to ourselves, well, that would be great, except it still wouldn't really be protected. Anybody can change it. If a governor in the future wants to do something on that land, they could change it. And so we were weighing our options, and we decided eventually that the wisest way to go and to get the strongest protection for that land would be to get a bill sponsored by a legislator and try to get a bill put through the legislature. And that's exactly what we did. In 2016, we approached Representative Sam Keto with this idea, and it was near the end of the legislature at that time, and they couldn't introduce any bills, but he supported it, and he was intrigued with our idea to protect the land, and he was surprised that it hadn't been done already, and so were we. And so we didn't get anything done that year. The next year, he wasn't running. Representative Sarah Hannon, my representative from Juneau, was running. And we approached her. Actually, I met with her, and my wife met with her to share this idea with her before she actually became a representative. And she supported it immediately. And she got to work on it almost as soon as she got in office. And she introduced a bill. And that bill in last year's legislature made it through the entire legislature. And it died because COVID hit, which is a really, really tragic thing because we worked so hard on it, and I was heartbroken that it didn't get through. And we worked really hard getting this bill through the legislature last year, and it died in the House Finance Committee before it got passed on the Senate floor. And because of that, we had to reintroduce it to the new legislature, the 31st Alaska State Legislature, and that's what we did. We introduced it again this year. We are still in the 31st Alaska State Legislature right now, and this year, HB 10, Representative Sarah Hannon's bill, passed with full support from the legislature, and it was signed by the governor. And because of that, 260 acres in Funter Bay surrounding the cemetery is now protected by the state legislature, which will be very, very difficult to ever undo again in the future. And so that's the most important thing here. I think what we did in Funter Bay is we made a statement that this is a very sacred place, that we support the history that happened there. We don't ever want what happened to the people in St. Paul and St. George to happen to anyone else ever again. And also, it made the state of Alaska acknowledge what happened on their land and acknowledge that this can happen again. What happened in the past can happen again if we don't remember it. That's the most important thing about all of this work that we're doing. If we don't remember what happened, we are bound to repeat it. And you don't have to look very far to see the worst of people around the world. And you could see parts of our history being repeated in different places around the world. And that's really sad. And that's exactly what we're fighting with when we're trying to fight for our history. Up until a few years ago, you couldn't even Google what happened in Funter Bay. You couldn't find it anywhere. And that's not okay. It's not okay that people are leaving our universities and people are leaving our high schools and they don't know what happened. Just 10 or 15 miles away from the state capital in Juneau. That's not okay. And that's what we're doing here. Patricia, Mike Livingston, Lauren, we are fighting to make sure that our history is remembered and that people don't ever forget and we don't repeat what happened again, so that people know and live and learn by our example. Mike, I hope I didn't go over my time.
Your presentation was wonderful, Martin, and really appreciate all the history that you've shared with us, as well as your passion for the amazing work you've been able to do in Juneau. And hopefully you can stick around and answer any questions that might have. And Martin has been working with a large group, meeting at least once a month, sometimes twice a month in Juneau, and been able to basically move mountains. And we really appreciate all the amazing work that Martin has done and will continue to do. So Kagasakun, thank you, Martin, and please stick around in case we have questions. And hopefully Patty can stick around too and have some follow-up questions. I'd like to transition next to Lauren Peters. And Lauren has been doing some amazing work in our region, particularly the Pribilof Islands, and is also working on her PhD at University of California, Davis. So Lauren, I'll turn the microphone over to you.
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me here, and for Kimiko for sponsoring us today. My bandwidth is really terrible, so I've prepared a little video, and Kimiko, if you could play that for me, please. Ayaga kucha asakta cooking, unanga o cooking. Hello, my name is Lauren Peters. I'm enrolled with the Adagu tribe and the tribe of Tanahami in the Unanga Nation in the land and waters that are considered now the Aleutian and Pribilof Islands of Alaska. I'm a second-year PhD scholar in Native American Studies at UC Davis. I have a designated emphasis in human rights, concentrating on human rights of the dead, and that emphasis is to reflect my work finding and documenting Alaska Native children who died and are buried in Native American boarding school cemeteries. This summer, I was a Mellon Public Scholar under mentor Dr. Keith Wattenpaugh, where I had the honor of rematriating my relative who died at Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania. Today, I'll talk about how the boarding school era affected Alaska Natives and introduce you to my great Aunt Sophia and talk about retracing her journey home this summer to St. Paul Island. To situate ourselves, this is a map of the indigenous territories in Alaska. The specific areas we'll need to know are the Aleutian Islands, which are the purple arc, stretching from the tip of the peninsula to Russia, and the Pribilof Islands, which are just above the Kayaker, St. Paul, and St. George Islands. Just below the Kayak is Unalaska Island, and in the green area to the right is Southeast Alaska, where the first boarding schools were established. Unanga Pribilofs are the Seal Islands, the largest fur seal rookery in the world. In the 1700s, the Russians took Unanga away from their Aleutian Island homes and brought them here to club seals for their pelts. In 1867, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation freed the Southern Blacks, the US government bought these 2 islands full of captive workers. They were called slaves of the harvest. It was set up like a company town, but the occupants were not US citizens. They were wards of the state and were not completely free of US government intervention until 1983. Men worked harvesting fur seals. Women's jobs were to take care of their sealing husbands. Girls would marry into the sealing industry, and boys grew up to be sealers by age 14. Orphan girls were worse than useless. They were a drag on the sealing profit. In the late 1880s, a way to offload these orphan girls became available in the form of native boarding schools. This is the Bear. It was captained by Captain Healy. He was the first Black captain in Alaska. This picture was taken in 1895, the year before Sophia and Irene were stolen. But the 5 girls in front are St. Paul orphans, and the 2 people on the far left back are Mary and John Tuck, who are in this picture actively stealing these children away to a Methodist missionary on Unalaska Island called the Jesse Lee Home. So Sophia and her sister Irene were ages 8 and 10 when they were taken in 1896 on the boat called the Homer from St. Paul to Unalaska, where they stayed at the Jesse Lee Home, learning English and household chores. In 1900, the Yukon opened for gold prospectors, bringing in a large amount of people passing through Unalaska and bringing the Great Sickness. Irene died in 1900. The following summer, Sophia was sent 4,000 miles away by boat and train to Carlisle, Pennsylvania. This is Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It was founded by Lieutenant Richard Henry Pratt in 1879 and was open until 1918. His motto was, "Kill the Indian to save the man." It was the first US government-funded school, and they took children from as far away from Alaska to Puerto Rico. He would take a photo of the children in their native outfits, cut their hair, and put them in uniforms, and take it again, using these photos to show that he was civilizing the native children. He used these photos to lobby the BIA for land and funding. That's his house in the background. It still stands there today. So while Pratt was working in the East Coast, the Reverend Sheldon Jackson was moving to the West Coast and up into Alaska, and this was by design. Pratt and Jackson had a rich past. Jackson's sister was a wife of the Reverend George Norcross, pastor of Pratt's and Jackson's home church in Carlisle, all of whom had similar goals for Native people. Norcross was hired by the school to perform services and shows up on documents burying the children in Carlisle. So this is Sophia Titoff's student card. Cut off at the top a little bit is the word dead. She was from Alaska. She was from the Aleut Nation. Her father's name was not Matthew Titoff, spelled correctly here. And her age here says 12, but she was actually 14 at this time. But you can see she was so tiny, 4'6" and only 80 pounds, that they kept on writing her name, her age, as younger than she was. And then importantly, if you look at the 5 names that are on the bottom of her card, those are places where she was placed out in the outing program. And in the first 48 months of her being at the school, she was in the outing as a domestic service for 30 of those months. She spent the entire last year in the hospital. There's estimates that 500 or more children died at Carlisle, and 13 Alaskan kids are still buried there. So the cemetery was moved at least once. The square on the upper left-hand side is the original cemetery. And if you look at the rectangular white building next to it, and there's a track with a field there, that's where Jim Thorpe played football. And people would have to walk through the cemetery, the children's cemetery, to watch Jim Thorpe play. And that building, that rectangular building, is about 100 yards long and about 3 stories tall. And it was built by child labor. And all those stones, quite large stones, were quarried and brought over there by child labor. And then in 1927, it was moved to its current location. And you can see there's a stoplight on the corner. That's the entrance to the barracks. It's quite noisy. quite a lot of exhaust, and there's a fire station nearby, so the engines go by with their lights and sirens quite often. It's not a very peaceful place. So this is plot A16, one of 186 plots with children in the cemetery. And we can see here that in a final show of disrespect, her name is misspelled, and the tribe is a made-up name. There is no Chuckson tribe. My son Andrew, who's a senior in biology at UC Davis, stayed with her person from gravesite to the anthropology tent, finally wrapping her in the fur seal pelt that she was to be buried in. After a short transfer ceremony at Carlisle, Sophia was on her way to St. Paul Island. Now we did the 4,000-mile trip in reverse, first back home to wait out our 90-day COVID restriction that was imposed on St. Paul, and then a 2-day trip north through Seattle, Anchorage to Cold Bay, and then north to St. Paul Island. St. Paul Island is known for being the largest fur seal rookery in the world. And if you look at the picture on the right, all those little brown spots, those lumps that look like wood, are actually fur seals. And in its heyday, that whole beach would have been entirely covered in seal. We arrived on Sunday, July 4th, known as June July, to a festival with a feast, games, and a grease pole climbing contest. We think when the US took over, the workers were allowed July 4th off and the kids were given candy, and no one really understood what was happening, but it occurred during the transition from June to July, thus happy June July, ironically celebrating Independence Day as captive people. It took Sophia 3 tries to get in due to inclement weather, and when she did arrive, the entire town greeted her at the airport. We paraded through the town with Andrew sitting with her in the back of the truck, past the Titoff family home, and into the church. After a 2-hour-long service, we drove up to the cemetery with Andrew once again, her pallbearer, and my other son, Lucas, carrying the 8-foot-tall cross. Notice that the Russian Orthodox Church doesn't offer any seats. Before we visit Sophia in the cemetery, keep in mind that there are 357 Indigenous boarding schools in the US alone. Almost all of them were modeled after the Kill the Indian, Save the Man motto, and almost all of them had their own cemeteries. Article 10 of the 2007 UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People reads, Indigenous peoples shall not be forcibly removed from the lands or territories. No relocation shall take place without the free, prior, and informed consent of the Indigenous peoples concerned, and after agreement on just and fair compensation and, where possible, with the option of return. Sophia's been brought home. She was a lost child. No one, not the families, not the tribes, or cultural centers knew of her existence. They are writing her into the genealogy of the tribe as we speak. In all this darkness of stolen children, I can't help but marvel how meaningful her short life was and how many people she has touched. I wouldn't have been enrolled in a PhD program if it weren't for her. So many people are seeing this as the end of things being done to Alaska Natives and to the Unanga specifically. Returning Sophia is creating an excitement on St. Paul Island and is giving hope to young people on the island that we can take back our culture, our language, and our stolen children. My job is to locate the children and connect them with their families. Orphans who die away from home just disappear. I would like to thank the U.S. Army for their compassionate handling of Sophia's remains, and to both the Army and the Mellon Public Scholars Program for the funding that made this trip possible.
Thank you, Lauren. What an amazing film, and a ton of history that you've shared with us in a short time. Really appreciate that. About how long from start to finish did that whole process take you, Lauren? And are there others from our region that you would like to see returned?
There were 14 children in the Carlisle Cemetery. There are now 13. There are 2 more from our region, one from the Pribilofs and one from Belkovsky. They were all products of the Jesse Lee home. And there are 2 more from Kodiak. And then, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are about 60 Alaska Natives in Chemawa in Oregon. And those are just 2 cemeteries. And so I'm really hopeful that Deb Holland will combine what the Army is doing very compassionately at Carlisle and use that as an umbrella for the rest of the schools so we can get our children home.
Thank you, Lauren.
I'm sorry, the whole process took about 4 years. And I say that Sophia found me because nobody was looking for her. She was a lost child, and same with her sister Irene. And Tlingit Elder Bob Sam contacted me in 2017 and said, I need your help. Can you help me find these girls from your region? And the first name she gave me was Sophia Titoff. And I said, well, that's my relative. And that's when it all started.
I met Bob Sam a couple of years ago, and he's really doing some amazing work down there. Lauren, how much longer before you graduate? And hopefully you're going to send us all an invitation.
It's a long time. Yeah, I'm only in my 2nd year as a PhD student. So I'll get my master's at the end of this year and I advance to candidacy the following year, and then I'll be able to write my dissertation.
We're all very proud of you and really appreciate your work, Lauren. If you could stick around, I'm sure people are going to have questions for you. And I wanted to circle back around to Patty, and Patty had some information that she wanted to share with us.
Thank you. A great presentation, Lauren. Tough one to follow, and yours as well, Martin. Both of them very important stories, and I'm glad we're getting some of them out there because, we both mentioned, we've all mentioned, these stories have not been really told and actually weren't taught in the schools when I was growing up. So, learning it all. But what I was wanting to say, one of the ultimate goals of mine, and actually this was even before I got on as a APERT, as their administrator, as an employee, one of the things that I really would like to see, and I think is well deserving, is an Aleut memorial. And my vision is to have a map of the Aleutian Islands and where they were sent down to Southeast Alaska, listing all of the 881 Aleuts that were evacuated. And mind you, with the people that passed, almost 40 of them passed down in Southeast Alaska, I would like a cross listed with their names down there. Because, this story to us, we got the World War II memorial, the veterans back in Washington, D.C. I would like to see something simply, maybe put an Anchorage here. I know on the Pribilofs have been to St. Paul and St. George, and in their churchyard, they have the list of the people that have perished. And I think that's very, very important. I like to go to cemeteries, and Lauren, your presentation on Sophia, I think we need to be able to go to a place and pray for the people that have passed. Like Martin said, we're Russian Orthodox, and that's just what we do. And that's how, we were trained, to always pay respects to our people who were, have passed on before us. And, like I mentioned, I really thank Dr. Mikey, for allowing me to say this, is an Aleut evacuee memorial dream wall. And I picture this actually in Unalaska along the sidewalk, right along the Holy Ascension Cathedral. They have a big cement wall, and I thought that would just be an ideal place for. National Park Service has a really neat map, and I meant to send it to Dr. Mikey this morning as well, but I didn't. But to me, like I said, just listing all of the 881 people that passed. I think that would be one thing. If anything, if APRD could do it, but if, we try to pursue another avenue to get monies, I think that this is very, very important. And actually, on that note, what I did for my parents and my dad, like I said, is from McCushion, so I built a model small little miniature chapel, kind of like the Eklutna spirit houses, and I put that on my dad's grave in the cemetery at the Holy Ascension churchyard. And then just before I left Unalaska, I thought it was only appropriate to build a replica Kashiga chapel for my mom's, and I put it on her grave up at the Unalaska cemetery. To me, that's just paying respect to their homes, which were evacuated and lost. And then also something like that with Borka and, Attu. I think it's really important to list all of the, like I said, the stories and names. It needs to be out there for people to see. Thank you. Kagasakun.
Thank you, Patty, and thank you for mentioning the miniature chapels you've been building to honor your parents. Those are really super. Martin, I wanted to circle back to you and see if there's anything else you wanted to add, or any questions you might have for Lauren or Patty, or comments.
No, thank you so much, Mike. I did want to just mention that, we did get the bill passed to this cemetery in Thunder Bay, where these 40 or more graves is protected, will not be bothered. There will be no logging there. There will be no mining there. It's protected. But our work is not done there. Thunder Bay, if you go there today, as I did about 10 years ago, if you go there today, you will see about 30 crosses that are standing there, and you will have no idea why they are there unless you know the history yourself, and the history is not well known. So whenever I went there, I actually I didn't know where the cemetery was, and I approached a number of cabins whenever I was in Thunder Bay asking them where the cemetery was, and nobody could tell me where it was. And the people that thought it was there thought it was Japanese people or German prisoners that were there, and I knew they were wrong. And I was sad to know that people in Thunder Bay didn't know much about it. It's just not the case anymore. But if you go there, there should be something there that says what happened, and we're working on that right now. We're working on interpretive panels to be placed in Thunder Bay. This land is now managed by the state parks. It's not managed by the Department of Natural Resources anymore. And now we are working with the State of Alaska State Parks Department, which is extremely underfunded. And we're trying to get these interpretive panels placed there. And we are, in about a year, the state parks will go through a grant process. Hopefully they will get the grant, and then they will be able to fund the panels that we have designed, which will cost about $30,000 or more. And after that, then you will be able to go to Thunder Bay, see the cemetery, read about what happened, and you will know what exactly happened at that place, which is really important. And I just wanted to mention also that the order that was sent by the President of the United States in 1942 to remove the people from St. Paul and bring them away was also the same order that was also meant to round up all of the Japanese people in the United States. And that was under the same order. And it's kind of crazy, but my wife is also part Japanese, and her grandfather was one of those who was rounded up and brought to an internment camp in Idaho. So our histories were intertwined, and we didn't know this about each other until we were together for about 2 years after we were dating. And we figured out that, her grandparents and my grandparents were both interned by the same federal government and treated much the same way. And it's kind of a sad story, but it's a very interesting story, and it's one that we have been trying to share as much as possible. So thank you very much, Mike.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks for mentioning the intertwining history that sometimes we don't know about, and it's interesting to find. And if I remember right, the Tadaima or another group is going to have an upcoming event on that specific order you mentioned. I think it's 1066, and I think it's in January or February that event is going to occur, and it would be good for all of us to learn more about that order. Lauren, let's see. There was a question in the if I can find it in the chat. Question for you: how many setbacks did you experience? Oh, thank you. What offensive things that others you worked with happened? How did you push forward no matter what? And thank you for your inspiring work. So I'll turn the microphone over to you, Lauren.
Well, luckily at the time, there was an excellent book put out by Ray Hudson called Family After All that documented all the Jesse Lee Home kids. And I'm using that as my base, along with census records and things like that, to track what happened to all these children that were sent away. Once I knew about Sophia, things went really quickly, actually. I didn't have very many setbacks. Our biggest setback was COVID. But in 2017, the Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition had a roundtable, and they had the first repatriation, and they were able to explain the process to us. There was about 60 of us there. We were all represented in Alaska by the different regions, and then they gave us all the paperwork. So it was one of the minor setbacks was it was a shock to the St. Paul folks to find out that they had these missing children. And it took them a while to go through their genealogy to find out who I was, because I grew up in California, and to find out who Sophia was and Irene and verify the story. And in the meantime, I was going ahead with the affidavits that the Army needed and learning about the process with them. There were a few asked for offensive things. One of the things about the Army is that they can't help but be the Army, and their language is Army language. And it's not that they're trying to be insensitive. It's just it's just their language. Like one of the things that they put out was the schedule for the process that was going to happen in Carlisle was called the execution schedule. And I said, you need to get that word off. That's really offensive. And I don't want any of my elders to see that word associated with this process. And we had a couple things that were confusing to me when I went there, but I had an interpreter. He was a Sac and Fox tribe, and he spoke Army. So when I had a problem, I could go to him and I said, this is really confusing to me. And he would sometimes go to the Army and say, what do you mean by this? And he would, put us together in language that we both could share. So there weren't any major offenses being done on either side. And they were very compassionate. They used the top anthropologists, archaeologists in the world, and they got it that these were our children. And I went in there very defensive. I'm very protective of Sophia. But at the end, I invited everybody into the tent to thank them for their work and their compassion. And it was, it's a safe place to go get our children.
Thanks, Lauren. And thanks for mentioning the book Family After All and Ray Hudson and the Jesse Lee Home. I've been doing research for a few years on the designer of the handsome Alaska flag, Benny Benson, and Ray's work has been particularly helpful in trying to track down information about Benny Benson in terms of his correct date of birth and his cultural heritage. And Lauren, one more question from the audience. Has anyone determined just how many of the children that died at the schools did so during the year of the thank you. So there's the question there for you, Lauren.
Okay, thank you. Well, so most of my research right now is on Carlisle and the Jesse Lee Home, and I'm just starting to branch out to Chemawa. So Carlisle actually closed before the Spanish flu. I noticed at least one person from our region is buried at Chemawa, and looks like it might have died from the Spanish flu. But most of the kids died from a disease that the umbrella term for it is consumption. And that's really a disease of neglect and of malnutrition and of poor healthcare, mostly poor nutrition. Like you could see from Sophia's card, she was only 80 pounds at 14 years old and only 4'6". And the anthropologist actually told me that she thought that she was only about 4'1". And so that there's much more death from neglect than there were from the Spanish flu.
Thank you, Lauren. And I know that the work that Martin's been doing in Juneau with Funter Bay, a lot of those deaths down there were basically unnecessary and probably wouldn't have occurred had it not been for the horrible conditions in the camps. Patty, I wanted you to give an opportunity. You put something up in the chat if you wanted an opportunity to speak about that.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Again, the reason I became involved with this, of course, well, both my parents being evacuees and, of course, the history not told, excuse me. One of the things, what I wanted to do still is, some type of recognition for Burnett Inlet, Ward Cove, Ward Lake, and Killisnoo. And Martin, of course, knows those areas down there in Southeast, and those where our people are still, some of them are still buried down there. And me personally, my dad's brother is in Burnett Inlet and down by Wrangell, and people that live down in Wrangell, they said you go to the place and you can't even see where there was or where there is a cemetery, and there was 4 people, excuse me, that are buried down there. So I just think it's important, again, like to that map, to mention all the people, and it's very important to have this these stories told, and may their memories be eternal. Thank you. Kagasakung.
Thank you, Patty. Martin, I wanted to give you one last chance to anything else you wanted to chime in, words of wisdom. And I'd just like to note I've had the honor of serving with Martin over the past year or year plus with the Funter Bay group. And Martin does a really amazing job. These are very emotional topics. You don't realize it until you start hearing the testimony, you start reading the documents, or you watch the films from 1981, and very, very emotional. And we've all been on an emotional roller coaster, and it's just wonderful having Martin's calming voice to get us all calmed down and to focus on what's important. And that's the long-term recognition of the people that lived at Funter Bay.
Oh, thank Mike. Thank you. No, I just wanted to, our work is not done. We have a lot of work to do here. All of us do. And it's easy to, throw your arms up and say, man, get frustrated. And like Lauren said, she's just branched out to the other Chemawa. My mom went to school there. And it's not too much. We can do this, as a team. And if we work together, our group here in Juneau started out to be really small. It started out with the Friends of Admiralty Island, which is a group of 7 people. And now the group that Mike and Patricia meet on regularly, now there's well over 40 of us and more even on our email list that follow us and follow our work. So there's a lot of people watching our work now. And, the state of Alaska didn't really take us serious until after we got the bill passed. After we got the bill passed, the state parks started engaging with us. And that's really frustrating. We've kind of hit a part where we love that we have their support, but they are a government agency, and they have ways and things that they have to go about doing it. And that's just really frustrating because we've been kind of left to our own devices up until we got the bill passed. And now the state parks are saying, okay, this is what we're going to do now. And so we're saying, well, hold on. You guys said we're kind of doing this on our own now. And so it is really kind of frustrating, but also we're happy that they're taking us serious at the same time. And we know that the work we have to do is a lot. This is just one location. Funter Bay is by far the most deadly camp of the 6 camps. 40 people died there, mostly very young people and mostly the elders. But there was also about 17 people that died in Killisnoo, and all the other camps, None of those camps have been taken care of. They all need to be worked on. We need to get the camp from Killisnoo back into some order. We want to get it out of private hands and cared for by us once we're done with our work in Funter Bay. So we have a lot of work to do, and we're not going to give up until we're done.
Thanks, Martin. One theme that I've noticed over the years is that quite often in our region things are forgotten about. Like the children from Carlisle Indian School, like Funter Bay, like Macushon, Kashiga, like Private George Fox, the only Unalaska Aleut soldier killed in action during World War II. There's memorials for other soldiers who died in less than honorable situation, but Private George Fox was almost completely forgotten about. And again, the only Unalaska Aleut soldier killed in action in World War II, and possibly any war since. And it's thanks to historians like are on this panel, as well as people like Ray Hudson, who's done a really good job of documenting some amazing history. And Ray has a question up that maybe Kimiko could share with us. What is being done to document the process, the long process leading to repatriation? I'm thinking of the late Patrick Pletnikov and Philemon Tudiakov and Dmitry Filomonov, who is very much with us. There are also all the previous staff members who worked for years, whose stories about this effort would be inspired. So I'm going to see if maybe Patty or Lauren or Martin can take a try at those at that question.
Hey, Mike, I could only speak from our work in Funter Bay, and that's one of the trying things from Funter Bay is that there are people who don't always agree with our work that we have had to come in conflict with. In fighting for protection for Funter Bay, there's also people in St. Paul and St. George that don't necessarily want their loved ones there. They know they're buried there. They do want repatriation. So that has been a conflict for our group that we've had to fight with, and has been difficult to advocate for protection for this sacred ground, but also realizing that people don't necessarily want their loved ones to be there forever. And so it's something we've had to weigh and also, take serious. So I can't speak much to that in our group.
Thanks, Martin. And Lauren, I know you've received some amazing press, and we're very grateful for that you're willing to get the word out. But do you know of anything that's being done to document the long process included in repatriation?
No, I don't. And thank you, Ray, for pointing out that there's other people that have come before. And I think that's a real weakness that we have right now. I think we need to get together and stop working so separately and have some sort of group that meets regularly that tells the other people what we're doing, like this, and supporting each other. Because I think that especially during the time of COVID, we've all been, boxed in our house working by ourselves. And it's a great opportunity for us to get together and do this work together. It's hard to do it by yourself, and it's not natural to do this work alone.
Thanks, Lauren. I know one of Ray Hudson's teachers and one of my teachers was Amphisia Shapsnikoff from Unalaska, and she said exactly what you just said, Lauren, and that is when there's a challenge, we need to get together and we need to speak up. We need to be willing to go before the media and to stand up before the different groups that Martin has stood up before and Patty that has stood up before. So I think we're just about out of time, but I did want to give Patty one opportunity to say something.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Mikey. And good question from Mr. Hudson there. He was my first grade teacher. So one of the things that I want to point out, and I can't speak for all the Aleuts, but one of the things that my dad, devoted Russian Orthodox, and my mom and grandma have passed as well. All of them have passed. But one thing we believe in is we don't like to disturb the body once it's laid to rest, and I understand repatriation is important to a lot of people, a lot of families, but for me, recognizing where their grave sites are down in Southeast Alaska, and to not disturb a body after they've been laid to rest, I think that has been something that is could go either way. So it is very interesting topic. And when they were extending the runway in Sitka, they were removing all of the people that had died from TB that were put in those bunkers down there. And actually the last two remains that nobody could really identify. And then I went and showed the names to my dad, and my dad goes, that's my sister Nellie. And it was like, wow. And so we got Nellie and her husband Peter brought back to Unalaska to be buried. And my dad was saying that, he goes, they weren't really they weren't really buried. They were put in, they had bunkers that they had all the people that died. And so, we were talking about that, and that's kind of where the idea of, my dad says, you don't disturb people once they're laid to rest. So yeah, excellent points. But thank you for this opportunity to talk. Kagasakun.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank everybody for being on the panel today, especially Patty and Martin and Lauren. I appreciate all of your fine work, your dedications to all these challenging topics that take dedication for years to really accomplish some tasks. I think we've about run out of time. I thank the audience for being with us today. And I apologize for us sharing the wrong link. Instead of sharing the StreamYard link, we should have shared the YouTube link, but thank you for joining us. I'd like to turn the microphone back over to Kimiko. We have another panel coming up at 11 o'clock that I hope you're able to join, and hopefully we can get the correct YouTube link and reshare that with everybody. And then maybe Kimiko can speak for a moment about some of the other events coming up in January or next year. And again, thank you to DIMA 2021 for the opportunity for our panel to speak to your group. It is interesting to learn the similarities between what happened to the Unanga people, the Aleut people during World War II, and what happened with the Japanese people. So Kimiko, if you're still with us, if you could come on back and share. And again, thanks Patty, Martin, and Lauren.
So I wasn't expecting to be called on screen, so I don't have much to say other than we do have a second panel that's going to be starting in about 40 minutes. I put the link in the chat for the next panel, which is going to discuss pilgrimages and oral histories, I think. So thank you all for joining us. And I don't know if you have any last words, Mike, before I hide again backstage.
Before you hide, I did have one other question. Is there another event coming up in January or February having to do with the Order 1066 or whatever that order was?
So 9066 is the executive order that Roosevelt signed, and in February 19th is in the Japanese American community. We call it the Day of Remembrance, and this will be the 80th anniversary. So I'm sure there will be many events, from many different organizations for the entire month of February. So I don't know of anything specifically off the top of my head, but I'm sure that there will be many things advertised, probably starting in January.
Super. Thanks, Kimiko. And hopefully you'll send an invitation to us for that event. So to summarize, some bad things happened during World War II to the Unanga and Aleut people. It's important that this history not be forgotten. It's important that we be grateful for the people who have dedicated a big portion of their life, a big portion of their heart to making sure that this history is not forgotten. And I really want to thank Patty and Martin and Lauren for being with us here today. And hopefully you'll be able to attend the event coming up at 11 o'clock. Our speakers are going to include Dr. Rachel Mason from the National Park Service, Dr. Holly Guys, who graduated with her PhD from Yale, and Helena Schmitz, who had the beautiful song for us to begin with. So Kagasakun, thank you everybody for being here, and hope to see you at 11, and also hope to see you in January, February with other events. So thank you everybody again for being here. So